The day I signed the papers that would destroy my son was the best day of my life. I sat across from my attorney in a conference room on the 14th floor. The city of Denver spread out behind the glass like a painting, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 3 years: peace. Not the kind that comes from forgetting, the kind that comes from finishing what someone else started. Let me tell you how we got there. My name is Walter Greer. I'm 67 years old. I spent 31 years building a company called Greer Precision Parts, a manufacturing firm that supplied components to aerospace contractors across the Mountain West. I started it in a rented garage in 1991 with 2 used lathes, 1 employee named Doug, and a contract worth $11,000. By 2019, we had 93 employees, a 40,000 square foot facility outside Denver, and revenues pushing $18 million a year. I didn't inherit it. I didn't marry into it. I built every inch of it with my own hands, my own credit, and more sleepless nights than I can count. My wife, Carol, was with me through all of it. She did the books for the first 12 years, sitting at our kitchen table after dinner with a calculator and a glass of iced tea, making sure we made payroll every single Friday. She passed in 2017 from ovarian cancer. I held her hand when she went. After that, the company was all I had left that felt like her, like proof that our life together meant something. My son, my only child, his name is Derek. He came into the business in 2014. I brought him in because he was smart, genuinely smart, the kind that makes you proud, and because I wanted someone I trusted to eventually carry what I'd built. His mother wanted that too. He had an MBA from the University of Colorado, sharp instincts, and a way of walking into a room that made people feel like things were under control. I gave him the title of Vice President of Operations. I gave him a salary I would have called insane in my garage days. I gave him every opportunity I never had. What I didn't see, what I was too close to see, was that Derek had also found a woman named Kristen. Not a bad person in the way people mean when they say bad, but ambitious in a particular way. The kind of ambitious that looks at a 62-year-old man running a profitable company and sees an obstacle, not a father. She came to 3 company Christmas parties. She was charming at all 3. I liked her. I told Derek she was good for him. I was wrong about that too. In March of 2020, Derek came to me with a proposal. He wanted to restructure my ownership. He said it was about protecting the company from estate complications, about streamlining decision-making, about positioning us for a possible acquisition he'd been quietly exploring. He had a presentation, 41 slides. He walked me through every one of them. I asked questions, and he had answers. He said he'd had 2 attorneys review the structure. He said it would actually strengthen my position long-term. I was 63. Carol had been gone 3 years. COVID had just started shutting things down, and I was scared about the business, scared about my employees, scared in the way you get scared when you're older and you realize the world can move faster than you can react. Derek seemed calm. Derek seemed to have a plan. I signed. I didn't read every page the way I should have. I trusted my son. What I signed was a recapitalization agreement that reclassified my shares from voting to non-voting and transferred operational control to a newly formed management entity which Derek controlled. It was buried in language I didn't fully understand, and I didn't have my own attorney present because Derek told me it was routine and we were on a deadline before a quarter-end cutoff. There was no acquisition. There was no deadline. There was just my signature and my son's plan. For 8 months, nothing felt different. I still went to work. I still walked the floor. I still knew every machine operator by name. Derek was deferential, almost warmer than usual. I thought the restructuring had actually done something good for us because he seemed more invested, more engaged. I thought maybe I'd been too protective of my ownership before, too reluctant to share real responsibility with him. I thought I was growing. Then in November 2020, Derek called me into the conference room. Not my office, the conference room. Kristen was there. A man I didn't know named Paul Shearer was there, introduced as the company's new outside counsel. There was a folder in front of my seat. Derek told me the board, a board I didn't know, had been formally constituted under the new structure, with members Derek had appointed, had voted to transition me to a non-executive advisory role. He told me my day-to-day access to the facility would be restricted for security and insurance purposes. He slid the folder toward me, and said there was a consultant agreement inside that would pay me $4,000 a month. I looked at my son across that table and I thought about Carol. I thought about how she used to fall asleep in the car on the drive home from the shop on Friday evenings, her head against the window, because she was so tired from the week. I thought about the Christmas in 1997, when we couldn't afford a real tree and Derek was 9 years old and we cut a pine branch from the yard and stood it in a coffee can and he thought it was the funnest thing we'd ever done. I pushed the folder back across the table and I left. I drove to a park near our old neighborhood and I sat in my truck for 2 hours. I want to be honest about what those 2 hours felt like. It wasn't anger, not at first. It was something worse than anger. It was the specific grief of realizing someone you love chose to do this to you, carefully, over time, on purpose. Derek hadn't made a mistake. He hadn't been confused or pressured into something. He had spent months constructing it. That meant that during those months, every dinner we'd had together, every phone call, every conversation where he asked how I was feeling, he had already decided. I drove home. I went inside. I made coffee. And then I did something that may have been the most important decision of my entire professional life. I called my attorney. Not Derek's attorneys. Mine. A woman named Patricia Okafor who had helped me with a supplier dispute back in 2011 and who I'd stayed in loose contact with ever since. I called her at 7 in the evening and she picked up and I told her what had happened. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, "Walter, don't sign anything. Don't respond to anything. Don't go back into that building until we talk in person." We talked in person the next morning. Patricia reviewed the recapitalization documents and spent 3 days with a business litigation specialist named Marcus Webb. What they found was significant. The restructuring had been executed with my genuine signature, which made unwinding it complicated. But in their rush to move quickly and quietly, Derek and his attorneys had made errors. The management entity had been improperly constituted under Colorado statute. The board appointments had procedural deficiencies. And there was a separate matter, one that Patricia flagged on the second day that turned out to be the most important piece of all. In 1998, when I had first started taking on serious aerospace contracts, I had filed for and received 3 process patents related to a specific method of tight-tolerance machining we'd developed in-house. Those patents were mine personally, not the company's. They had never been transferred because, frankly, I had forgotten about the distinction myself. We'd always operated as though the company owned everything. But on paper, legally, those patents were Walter Greer's, not Greer Precision Parts LLC. Every major aerospace contract the company held had those processes at its core. Without a license to use those patents, the company couldn't fulfill its primary contracts. Derek had taken the company, but he hadn't taken the thing the company couldn't run without. Patricia advised me carefully. She told me we had real legal exposure on both sides. A court fight over the recapitalization could go multiple directions and could take years. But the patent position was strong. She said I had 2 options. I could go to war immediately, which would be loud and expensive and uncertain. Or I could wait, document everything, let Derek believe he had won completely, and then execute from a position of maximum leverage at the moment of my choosing. I chose to wait. I want you to understand what that meant. It meant that for 14 months, I watched my son run my company. I watched him rename the executive team. I watched him move the company's banking relationship. I watched him and Kristen buy a house in Cherry Hills Village, a neighborhood where homes start at $2 million, while paying me $4,000 a month as a quote-unquote consultant. I received those checks, and I deposited them, and I said nothing. People who knew me, old employees, suppliers I'd worked with for 20 years, would see me around and ask how things were going. I told them I was stepping back, taking it easy, that Derek had everything handled. Some of them looked at me with an expression I recognized but couldn't quite respond to. They knew something was wrong. I think a few of them knew exactly what had happened. I just smiled and said I was enjoying the slower pace. It was the hardest performance of my life. Harder than any business negotiation, harder than any difficult year, harder than almost anything except watching Carol in that hospital bed. Because every morning I woke up and the first thing I thought about was that company. The people who worked there. Doug, who was still on the floor after 29 years. Maria in accounting, who'd been with us since 2003 and whose daughter had used our employee scholarship program for college. They didn't work for Derek. They didn't know Derek. They had built their livelihoods around something I created, and I had accidentally handed it to someone who saw it as an asset to be monetized, not a community to be honored. But I stayed quiet, and I built my case. Patricia and Marcus filed no lawsuits. Instead, they documented. They tracked the procedural violations in the board structure. They secured a formal legal opinion on the patent ownership, recorded and time-stamped. They made contact, quietly, with 2 board members. Derek had appointed men who turned out to be more uncomfortable with the situation than Derek realized. Men who had been told a particular story about my retirement that didn't entirely match the reality they were seeing. One of them, a retired banker named Tom Elias, eventually agreed to provide a sworn statement about the representations Derek had made to the board at the time of my removal. And Marcus found something else. In the course of managing the company, Derek had used company funds to cover personal expenses, remodeling costs on the Cherry Hills house, a vehicle purchase, travel that had no legitimate business purpose. It wasn't a massive amount by some standards, but it was documented in the company's own financial records, which Patricia obtained through formal legal process in connection with a separate filing. It was enough. On a Tuesday morning in February 2022, Patricia and Marcus filed simultaneously a complaint in Colorado District Court challenging the validity of the recapitalization on statutory and procedural grounds. A formal notice to Greer Precision Parts LLC and its management entity that the company's use of the 3 process patents constituted infringement, and that all licensing was immediately revoked, pending legal resolution, and a separate filing related to the financial misappropriation. I was in Patricia's conference room when the filings went through. She slid a copy of each across the table to me, and I read the first pages of each one. Then I looked out the window at Denver and I thought about Carol. I thought about that pine branch in the coffee can. I thought about Doug on the floor of a facility I built, running machines using processes I invented, under a man who had taken it all and was now about to find out what that cost. I'm not going to tell you the legal process was fast or clean, because it wasn't. Derek hired a team of attorneys. There were motions and counter-motions and deposition notices and mediation sessions. Derek, to his credit or maybe his arrogance, genuinely believed he could win. He believed the recapitalization documents, with my genuine signature, were enough. He believed the patent issue was a technical problem he could resolve through a licensing negotiation. He called me twice during the proceedings. I let both calls go to voicemail. My attorney told me not to engage directly, and I followed that advice. But I also just didn't have anything to say to him that was worth saying yet. What Derek didn't fully account for was Tom Elias's statement. When the board member who had appointed him laid out the specific misrepresentations Derek had made in order to secure the votes to remove me, the legal picture changed substantially. The procedural violations in the board constitution, combined with evidence of material misrepresentation to obtain board support, created a case for rescission that Marcus described to me as solid. The mediation that resolved the case took place over 2 full days. I sat on one side of a long table. Derek sat on the other. I had not been in the same room as my son in 14 months. He looked thinner. He looked like someone who had spent a year being more afraid than he expected to be. Kristen was not present. Their marriage, I had learned from Derek's own attorney in a deposition context, had ended 4 months earlier. The resolution gave me back controlling interest in the company. The management entity was dissolved. The financial misappropriation was addressed through a structured personal repayment by Derek, which effectively eliminated any equity value he had accumulated. He walked away from what had been worth several $1,000,000 to him with essentially nothing. Derek's attorneys tried, near the end of mediation, to introduce a personal appeal, a letter he had written, asking for some arrangement that would allow him to remain involved with the company in some capacity. I read the letter. His attorney watched me read it, and then looked at me with an expression that was almost sympathetic, the way people look when they're watching someone make a decision they know is going to be painful. I folded the letter and put it in my jacket pocket, and I told Patricia we could proceed with the final terms. I'm not going to dress that up as easy. He's my son. He will always be my son. There's a version of this story where I found a way to turn it into something redemptive, where I took the letter as a sign and carved out a role for him, and we rebuilt something from the wreckage together. I've thought about that version. On certain nights, I think about it quite a bit. But I also think about Carol, and how the company was what I had left of the life we built. I think about Doug and Maria, and the 90-some people who came to work every day inside something I created. And I think about the 14 months I sat across from Derek at dinners, having conversations about nothing, while he collected a salary from a company he'd taken from me using my own signature. That's not impulsiveness, or youth, or a bad decision made under pressure. That's a choice, sustained over time, with full awareness of what it was. I went back to the facility on a Thursday morning in April 2022. It was early, before most people had arrived. I parked in the lot and sat in my truck for a few minutes the way I used to when I was thinking through a hard week. Then I went inside. Doug was on the floor. He'd come in early the way he always did. He looked up and saw me and stopped what he was doing. He's not an emotional man. 30 years of manufacturing floor work tends to produce a certain kind of quietness in a person, but he crossed the floor and shook my hand and held it for a moment longer than a handshake requires, and I understood what that meant. I didn't make a speech. I didn't call a company meeting or send an all-hands email or do any of the things that would have made a better scene. I just walked the floor, said good morning to people as they came in, went to my office, which had been redecorated in my absence in a way I didn't particularly like, and sat down at the desk. There was a framed photograph on one of the shelves that Derek's redecorating hadn't removed. It was a picture of Carol and me at the facility's ribbon cutting in 2003 when we moved into the new building. She's laughing at something in the picture, her head tilted back a little, and I have my arm around her. We were 45 years old. I keep it there to this day. The company is doing well. We brought on 2 new aerospace contracts last year and expanded the machine shop. I promoted Doug to floor supervisor, which I should have done years ago and which he accepted with the same quiet dignity he brings to everything. Maria's still running accounting. We hired a new operations director, someone with no connection to the previous period, a straightforward professional who cares about the work and treats people right. I hear from Derek occasionally, not often. He left Colorado and is working for a manufacturing firm in Arizona in a mid-level role, which is either the beginning of something or the end of something. I genuinely don't know. He sent a card at Christmas. I sent one back. There are no phone calls yet. Maybe there will be someday. Maybe there won't. I'm 67 years old. I run the company my wife and I built. I show up on Monday mornings and I know every person on my floor by name and they know me. I have my health, more or less. I have this place that Carol's hands are all over, in the books she kept and the culture she helped shape and the simple fact that we decided together, in a rented garage in 1991, that we were going to build something real. My son tried to take it from me. He had every advantage, my trust, my signature, my instinct to believe the best of him. He came closer than he knows to succeeding, but he was in a hurry, and he was sloppy, and he forgot one thing. He forgot that I had 31 years of practice building things that last.